Welcome to Session 6 of Mainstream Apologetics. We're glad that you decided to join us for this session. During this session, we will defend the big idea that we introduced during our last session. We will answer the following questions. How do I know life was created for a purpose? And for what purpose did God create the universe and life? We begin this session with our big idea that we introduced during our last session. As you may recall, the big idea is the design and creation of the universe and the formation of life on Earth came about by the intervention of a transcendent divine designer. During the session, we will defend this claim by providing empirical evidence. So what is the evidence for purpose? How do we refute evolution as a fact? During this session, we will present 4 lines of inquiry. Each line of inquiry provides evidence to defend the following topics. The first, the fine-tuning of the universe to support life. The second, the explosion of major life forms in the fossil record during the Cambrian period. Third, the formation of genetic and epigenetic information, which serves as the blueprint for life. And finally, the universal patterns of design that exhibit themselves throughout creation. Our first line of defense is the fine-tuning of the universe. As you may recall, we touched on this topic in sessions 3 and 4. Here, we will address the topic of fine-tuning from a mathematical perspective. Scientists have determined that there are approximately 25 fundamental cosmological constants of physics that govern the universe. Notable examples are the speed of light and the gravitational constant. Scientists have also confirmed that these cosmological constants are interrelated and fixed. For example, if the gravitational constant varied by 1 in 10 with 39 zeros after it, the solar system would either implode, that is, collapse upon itself, or explode. It's fair to say that if any of these 25 cosmological constants vary even slightly, the universe and all living things would cease to exist. In addition to the cosmological constants of the universe, there are what's referred to as planetary properties that enable carbon-based life on planet Earth. They are thought of as life support constants. In 2004, Hugh Ross, from Reasons to Believe, enumerated some 322 planetary properties necessary to enable and sustain life. He determined that the probabilities of these properties coming about by random chance without the guidance of God is 1 in 10 with 282 zeros after it. Ross's conclusion was that while theoretically possible, it's practically impossible without the intervention of God's guidance. As with the cosmological constants of the universe, these planetary properties must also fall into a very narrow range of values and remain invariant for carbon-based life to exist. One notable exception to this notion of a single universe is what's called multiverse, or an infinite number of universes. The reasoning behind multiverse is that if there are an infinite number of universes, there is at least one that can be found to support carbon-based life. However, there is no evidence to support the theory of multiple universes. The bottom line is that probabilistically, these cosmological and life support constants could not have happened by chance in finite time. What does the Bible have to say about the formation of these cosmological constants and planetary properties? In Jeremiah 10:12, we read that the universe exhibits signs of design. But the Lord made the earth by his power, and he preserves it by his wisdom. With his own understanding, he stretched out the heavens. In this passage, we focus on God's wisdom and understanding. The Hebrew word used for wisdom means skill and craftsmanship. The Hebrew word used for understanding means rationale and reasoning, which we understand in this context as design intent. You may recall the illustration of Mount Rushmore from our previous session. This passage speaks of God's skill in creation. Likewise, Genesis 1:26 speaks of God's foreknowledge, where it says that we are made in God's image. By the way, many other passages refer to God's wisdom and understanding as it relates to creation. Since God himself is transcendent, his knowledge of design is also transcendent and pre-existent. Another passage that speaks about the physical laws of nature is Jeremiah 33:25. Jeremiah writes, "This is what the Lord says, I would no more reject my people than I would change my laws that govern night and day, earth and sky." In this passage, Jeremiah is comparing the laws that govern the universe with the covenant he made with the nation of Israel. Jeremiah is saying that because of the permanence of God's promises to the nation of Israel, the laws of nature are also immutable. This notion of immutability is the reason why scientists call these constants. Our second line of defense is what is referred to as the Cambrian explosion of life. The Cambrian period in the fossil record spanned a period of some 56 million years, from 485 to 541 million years ago. It represents the most formative period of carbon-based life, marked by the first large multicelled organisms. Therefore, the Cambrian period has been referred to as the Cambrian explosion and the biological Big Bang, because all known phyla came into existence during this period. By the way, when we refer to phyla, we are referring to the level of the taxonomic scale that distinguishes between major groups of species. From the fossil record during the Cambrian period, we observe the following key characteristics. First is the abrupt and sudden appearance of defined phyla and species over a very short period of 5 to 10 million years, with no transitional intermediate species. This type of biological activity is referred to as saltation. This period was then followed by the absence of macroscopic change over a very long period of 540 million years. This lack of biological activity is referred to as stasis. There are more than 50 excavations of fossils from the Cambrian period worldwide. The first excavation was in British Columbia, Canada, during the 1840s by paleontologist William Buckland. Buckland not only found fossils of bones, but also soft part imprints. Later in 1911, Buckland's findings were confirmed by paleontologist Charles Wilcott. Wilcott uncovered approximately 65,000 specimens at the Burgess Shale in British Columbia, Canada. What is remarkable about Wilcott's findings is that there were no Precambrian specimens found of equal complexity at lower strata. In other words, there is no evidence for intermediate specimens between the Precambrian and early Cambrian periods. This lack of evidence casts doubt on the efficacy of Darwin's theory of gradual mutation and natural selection. When we compare the Cambrian explosion with Darwin's theory of evolution, we come to realize that they are diametrically opposed to each other. Darwinism is based on a process of gradual incremental mutations over a very long period of time. We refer to this as gradualism because things come about gradually, not abruptly. Do we observe gradualism in the fossil records? The answer is no. This diagram compares Darwinian gradualism with the biological explosion period. The scale starts with the formation of the Earth an estimated 4.6 billion years ago using the old Earth timescale. With Darwinian evolution, life would have started some 4.6 billion years ago when conditions on Earth could enable and sustain life. Darwinian gradualism is represented by the green area. Population genetics was pioneered by J.B.S. Haldane and others in the early 1900s. Their collective goal was to determine if evolution could occur within 5 to 10 million years. To answer this question, they modeled genetic propagation using the following factors: population size, reproduction rates, and environmental conditions. What Haldane and his team determined was that there wasn't enough time to create all of the species within each of the phyla groups. This problem became known as Haldane's dilemma. So what does the Bible say about the sudden appearance of phyla and species? In Genesis 1:20, we read, "On the fifth day, then God said, let the waters swarm with fish and other life. Let the skies be filled with birds of every kind." Continuing in Genesis 1, in verses 24 and 26, "The sixth day, then God said, let the earth produce every sort of animal. Then God said, let us make human beings in our image to be like us." What we learn from this passage is that creation of the entire animal kingdom, including mankind, occurred on just 2 days of the 7 days. Genesis speaks of the brevity of creation, where creation is regarded by Scripture as a singular event that took place over the span of just 2 days. Our third line of defense is the blueprint for life. When we use the term blueprint for life, we are referring to DNA. The question for Orthodox Darwinists is, what is the origin of DNA? How could it evolve? Let's take a closer look at the process. What does evolution depend on? Natural selection. What does natural selection depend on? Cell reproduction. And what does cell reproduction depend on? DNA. So let's explore the options. Option 1, natural selection or chemical evolution. The question is, how can chemicals select? DNA is not a living organism. It does not have the formative power of selection and reproduction, as do single-cell organisms. Even if DNA evolved, how did a fully functioning cell come about from DNA? We regard this as a circular argument. Option 2, spontaneous generation. How can something as complex as DNA just suddenly appear? Remember, we're talking about 3.2 billion nucleotide pairs arranged in a specific order. Option 3, panspermia. Panspermia is the outlandish theory that aliens deposited life on Earth by way of some sort of interplanetary object. The question still remains, where did alien life come from? Finally, we're left with only one option. DNA and life came about by a divine designer. This is because all other options are highly unlikely or impossible. Oxford astronomer Sir Fred Hoyle summed up the formation of DNA and life using the analogy of a Boeing 747. He writes, "The chance that higher life forms might have emerged in this way, Darwinism, is comparable with the chance that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard might assemble a Boeing 747 from the materials therein. I am at a loss to understand biologists' widespread compulsion to deny what seems to me to be obvious. Hoyle estimates that the chance of complex life by evolutionary process is 1 in 10 with 40,000 zeros after it. Hoyle concluded that the design intelligence for life could not have happened by chance in finite time without the intervention of a divine design intelligence. So again, what does the Bible say about the blueprint for life? It says quite a bit. The psalmist writes in Psalm 139, "For you created my innermost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well." This passage is very descriptive about the formation of human life. It clearly speaks about God's primary role in our embryonic development. We make the following observations from this passage. First, God plays a central role in the process of human formation, from the time of conception to the time of birth and beyond. Biology often speaks of this as the wonders of embryology. Second, God provides the means by which our cells and body parts are assembled and arranged, when the psalmist says that we are knit and woven together. Clearly, this speaks of genetics and epigenetics. Third, we are wonderfully made. The Hebrew word used for wonderfully made refers to our distinction and separateness. Mankind is distinct from the rest of the animal kingdom by our intellectual superiority, our capacity to relate with God, our genetic distinction, and so on. Fourth, and finally, human complexity is awe-inspiring. The Hebrew word used for fearfully made means to be awestruck by God's creative intelligence and power. Our fourth and final defense is the universality of design patterns. When we speak of design patterns, we are speaking about a broad range of patterns exhibited in creation. These include patterns of arrangement, composition, proportion, similarity, uniformity, replication, duplicity, interdependency, and so on. We simply cannot ignore the fact that these patterns exist in creation. This begs the question, are these patterns the result of some form of natural replication, such as evolution, or are they the result of the deliberate design intention of a creator God? Perhaps the most profound of these design patterns is what's known as the Fibonacci sequence. The Fibonacci sequence consists of the following number sequence: 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and so on. Each number in the sequence is the sum of the preceding two numbers. The ratio between any two consecutive numbers is always 1.618. This ratio is commonly referred to as the Fibonacci golden rule or ratio. Here are some examples of things that exhibit the Fibonacci sequence. The number of petals in a flower always follows the sequence. The spiral in a seed head, shell, hurricane, solar system, and many other things follow the golden ratio. The proportions of the human face and body follow the golden ratio. And the ratio of female to male bees in a colony follow the golden ratio. One important thing to note about the Fibonacci sequence is that it broadly spans all systems of creation, from solar systems to planetary systems to living systems, which means this design pattern could not have evolved through a process of replication from a single or common source. We at Mainstream Apologetics believe that our Creator God is the common source of this design intelligence. During this session, we've answered the following crucial questions. How do I know life was created for a purpose? And what evidence is there to support purpose? As we conclude this session, we answer perhaps the most important question of all. For what purpose did God create the universe and life? The answer to this question is abundantly clear in the Bible. The universe and life were created for the divine purpose of glorifying God. In a nutshell, we were created by God and for God. The following passages declare this truth. Romans 11:36. For everything comes from him and exists by his power and is intended for his glory. Psalm 19:1. The heavens proclaim the glory of God. 1 Corinthians 10:31. So whatever you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Colossians 1:16. Everything was created through him and for him. Essentially, God glories in himself. Mankind glories in God and enjoys him forever. John Piper, in his book Desiring God, writes, God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in him. The Westminster Shorter Catechism writes, man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. We need to remember that mankind was uniquely created with the spiritual nature to both know God and enjoy God forever. Once again, we want to provide you with a time for reflection. If you're in a group, please discuss these questions. Otherwise, please answer these questions individually.